That's what it is. Yeah, I think she should probably leave the rest of it here just in case of that. Maybe on Wednesday.
I mean, technically, your taste buds can be satisfied just by the smell of things, so maybe you should go over and give it like a,
Oh gosh, no, that would make me want to have more.
County and that.
It doesn't look like it, but I was just asking.
Now they resold it again.
I don't think they. Oh.
So I'll try that one.
Okay. Where's she?
Okay, that's what I thought.
Nope, you can hold it, just click it.
yeah, when you're, when
All right, let's
the
go,
green
gentlemen.
lights up, so are the lights working? Yep.
We'd like to get started so we can get finished.
Oh, are you talking to us?
I'm just mentioning to the air. I'm talking into my microphone clearly, Ed.
We're talking to the big audience that we have.
All right,
That's
all
it.
right, all right.
One reporter.
There's one interested party might want.
Before we start, I have a conflict with our regular school board meeting on the 16th.
That's my first.
So you have a conflict too.
No, I don't.
I'd like to ask if we could move it to the 17th, Tuesday, if that would be all right. If not, I can miss it.
Eddie and I have something to do at 7 on Tuesdays.
Yeah, we should worship on Tuesdays.
Oh, I have Seaside in here. What's that? Seaside 2 at 7 on that Tuesday.
Okay, so then I will just be present then.
So Mike, you'll get the reins.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Oh, boy.
Hey, you thought that was a good idea.
In all my reign of school board, I have only missed one meeting.
Yep.
So I
For the
was,
record, you did try to get us to move. So.
my daughter has a dance studio, and this is their year-end performance of the entire company. So, and it's at Performing Arts. So I gotta be there.
Gotta be there.
Yeah,
Family first.
yeah.
Well, we are
Okay,
live online here as we go, and
all right. Welcome to our Board of Education workshop. Our mission, Raymond School District, is dedicated to providing a child-centered learning environment, expecting all students to learn and succeed. We commit to providing and utilizing a progressive, relevant curriculum, encouraging all students to become responsible citizens prepared to meet the challenges of the future. This meeting is a meeting of the Board of Education in public to conduct the school district's updates, planning, and learning, and is not to be considered a public board meeting that conducts school district business. This meeting is now called to order. It is 5:32. Please rise and say Pledge of Allegiance with me. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all. Roll call of attendance, please.
Ed Robinson,
Here?
Jenny Gonzalez,
Here.
Mike Powers,
Yep.
Audrey Costa,
Here.
Keith Gastonson. Here. Present, we have myself, Superintendent Mike Leach, and Business Manager Jeff Genovese.
Thank you, Mike. Verification of public notice pursuant to 19.84.
Meeting was posted in all usual spots, schoolhouse doors, e-version, down at the Village Hall, online, and media were notified and are present.
Okay, thank you, Mike. All right, we move to the topics for learning and discussion in this meeting. And first up is A, Budget 101 training, developing a preliminary budget for the 2025-2026 school year.
Yeah, we wanted to invite Mr. Genovese, who's our new Director of Business Services, effective July 1. I want to point out that Raymond gets the extra special services apparently gratis right now of Mr. Genovese, so we're very happy to invite him to talk about finances. And I think you'll find that as we move forward with things, he and I are talking along with Pete, what's the transition like, what are we going to move forward with reports, and how do we talk about budget and finances. So he's got a whole presentation here for you, and then you'll have a chance. It's informal, so if you have questions, feel free to dial in right away with those questions.
Okay. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to do a sort of a basic presentation just to go over what, the budget process and how it's run, and then I'm going to get slightly more complicated with some spreadsheets just to show you how I operate. And so I'm just going to start with this presentation, and then you also have a summary of the presentation. That's what we're going to just see how much time we have. I'm not going to go over. Your time is valuable, I know. So first of all, this presentation is also similar to one you'll see in the annual meeting. We talk about Wisconsin state budget impact on the district, enrollment, staffing, revenues, budgeted expenses, property values, and then there's some district comparisons just so you can sort of see what other districts are doing. So when we talk about the budget and we're working on the budget, we look at some of these bigger buckets. So the state budget, it has a hand in all of these things. So special education aid, per pupil state aid, the low revenue limit ceiling, which is how much per pupil you can levy, Raymond revenue limit ceiling, what yours is, and then your state equalization aid, and then open enrollment is actually affected because they set the number for an open enrollment regular ed and special ed student. So we look at all of those things when we're looking at revenues. And a lot of these revenues are your sort of the bigger revenues. We also look at student enrollment. One thing about student enrollment is that it's on a rolling average, a 3-year rolling average, and a 4K-er also, I think in Raymond is probably a 0.6 FTE resident. And we also look at, students that are open enrolling out, they're technically residents, and then residents in the village of Raymond that go here. And then we look at staffing. So we have a sheet that looks at the specialist, the core curriculum, all of those things. They all have different FTEs. They're not all one, full-time. So we look at all of those things when we're budgeting. What are we spending on, each one of those buckets? One of the things that's, I don't want to say easy, but DPI gives you a calendar of revenue. So this is the revenue calendar from 24-25. And so these are the largest revenues that we have. And this is probably like 90% of our revenues. And I have a calendar that tracks all of our revenues. So for instance, equalization, categorical aid is special ed. It's not as much, but it's still, a good decent amount for special ed. And then also in that calendar, I have property taxes, which are actually directed by state statute. So there's a date that it says in January and February that you receive tax revenue. So that's easy to predict also. So for this year, it was January 15th. If you notice, in September, you have equalization aid. In November, there's some special ed aid, but there's no large amounts of revenue in October and November. December, you get some, and then January. So there's a big lull in October, November, that you're still paying bills, but then you're using a lot of your cash. So if you get down to, on the second table, where you're getting property taxes in August, and categorical and open enrollment equalization aid in June, that's where a lot of your fund balance come from, but then you're using that for August, September, October, November, and then December you're getting some revenue.
And because we don't have much of a fund balance, that's the need for us to short-term borrow.
Right. So that's where the short-term borrowing comes in. Usually in November, October, November, you're using that, and it's not a bad thing. It's just because of the way revenue comes into the districts, That's just the way, that's just reality sometimes.
Jeff, what is the special adjustment aid?
So there are some districts that don't get a lot of equalization aid. So what they have something called special adjustment aid, which means you cannot have less than 15% of your equalization aid for the next year. So they call it special adjustment aid. So they give you 85% of your equalization aid. It just can't drop below that threshold.
So this is state.
Correct. You guys are not receiving special adjustment aid because you receive the full amount according to the general aid formula.
But some districts, for example, like Elmbrook, I think, does not receive
Yeah, there's a good deal of districts
a
that,
good number, so they would be a district that would have an adjustment there because they're not receiving equalization aid the same as everyone else.
and most of it is, like if your tax base is strong, and that most of the tax revenue will come from there, and then you get less equalization aid, and then that special adjustment aid kicks in. And if you look at June, this year is the mental health grant, which they got rid of for next year. But there's also a big chunk in addition to August, where the property taxes happen.
So Jeff, if I was to look at these buckets and you have them by month, if you were to put a percentage there,
Mhm.
you would probably say January might be 40% of total revenue or total income, I guess, or whatever you want to call it, or maybe 30. You see what I'm getting at?
Yep, January and February is the majority of your property tax, so that's 2/3 of your property tax. I haven't looked at your equalization aid, I haven't analyzed that yet.
Okay.
You guys get more equalization aid, so that December, January, February, I'd say you get, probably over half of your revenue.
Okay,
Just looking at what it is.
okay.
And then the next big chunk comes in June and then August. So here's just a quick glance at what this current budget is. Local sources, so each one of these have a category. So local sources is basically property taxes. State sources is state aid. Federal sources, there's some federal grants, and then special ed aid that comes from federal. And then inter-district payments, those are, we have a lot of shared services, and then most of that's open enrollment. So all the other sources, like student fees and stuff like that, is very minimal to the budget. So when you're looking at, well, how much student fees are you charging, trying to make up some of that money is very minimal. So majority of it is, for you guys, for Raymond, is the 3 big buckets, the state, and then open enrollment, and then property taxes.
So in the fall, when we have our annual meeting, will you have numbers attached to these?
Yeah, there'll be a lot of numbers in all of these tables.
So this entire presentation is virtually numberless because it's laying the groundwork of here's what to expect.
Right.
And once he gets into our numbers, he'll attach those, which is the
Yeah.
next step.
And we'll talk about the budgets moving forward, starting in July. And then, so this presentation specifically would be very much more robust in the annual meeting.
So that inter-district, that also, is that like our shared teachers?
No, that's mostly open enrollment.
Yeah, but I mean, is that?
Yep, and shared
that-
teachers, yep.
How does, not everybody does a pie chart like this, I'm sure, but is there any comparison of this to other districts to show how we stand, or?
You can, I haven't done that yet.
Oh, no, I'm not expecting you to, but I'm.
I can definitely, so when you talk about revenues, it just depends on how much local tax revenue a district has, so it varies widely. Like if you were to pass a referendum, that local source would go up and the state source would go down a little bit. So,
As a
like,
percent.
correct, as a
Not
percent,
dollar-wise, but as a
right.
percent. Okay.
So then going to the expense side, this is the basic three buckets, and when I normally give you board reports, these will be much more extensive, but just for this purpose, just to not confuse things, when you're talking about expenses in the general fund, you're talking about instruction, so costs related to students, teaching students, support services, which is guidance, support, administration, operations, custodians, and then they call it non-program transactions, which is mostly special ed, and then there's transfers between funds. The two bigger ones obviously are instruction and support. That's where most of your expenses come from. And support means also, so instruction is also like buying paper, and you're buying things in the classroom to support students. All of that is accounted for in certain accounts in the accounting.
So salaries and supplies.
Yep, so salaries are all of these buckets for instruction and support. So there's salaries, and then there's things you buy, and then there's people you hire, like to fix the boilers, even though Bob does a really good job. So those are the general big buckets. So another way of understanding those buckets is you're splitting them into salaries, benefits, purchase services, again, are hiring people to do things that someone can't do here. So if there's the well that breaks, you might not have somebody that can fix the well, so you're purchasing their service. A non-capital object is any expense, a supply that's under $5,000. So paper and pencils and books and technology, those are sort of mostly in that category. And then you have capital objects, so buying one big item that's $5,000 or more, like a van, if we ever buy a van, that would be a capital object.
What if a repair needed to be done to a boiler and it was $6,000? Would that be considered capital?
No, because you're not buying one object. It's just fixing something.
Okay.
Yep. Another bucket would be short-term debt, and then that's mainly insurance in the accounting. I'm sorry, interest in the accounting, insurance, and then transfers to other funds is a special ed. Special ed as an expense is a little strange because they're in the same bucket of money, but you're taking the final special ed expenses, and you're taking it from one pocket and you're putting it in the other special ed pocket. I'm going to explain more of that later, but it's a very interesting relationship that special ed has with general ed. And then there's fees. So fees are sometimes misunderstood. It's not a big part of the budget, but it has to be accounted for if you there's certain fees that are categorized as a fee. And then summer school.
When you do the budget, is it broke down from say books?
Yes, you're going to see that later.
All broke down.
Yep, I'll show you the breakdown of the budget later. Yep, those are the big buckets. So here's the budget this is the expense side. So these are those three buckets split up. So salaries and benefits, if you notice, salaries and benefits are always the largest part of your budget. I think it's 50, 60, 40, 50, make me do math, 50. So 60% of your budget. That's pretty normal for a K-8 in a high school. Sometimes it's usually 70%. Purchase services, again, are hiring people. It's also in the purchase services, there's some of the open enrollment expenses in there. I know it's weird. It's just the way that the accounting works. So that's why that percentage is larger, because your open enrollment out, I think for this year is going to be like $400,000. They consider that a purchase service. I don't know why. It's just the way the accounting works. Non-capital objects, again, are supplies. So if you're saying, well, I think we should buy less paper, well, it's 2% of your budget. So there's some battles that you don't want to take on just because it's just not that much. And then interest, short-term debt, insurance. And then the transfers is mostly that special ed transfer, which I'll talk about later. So salaries and benefits obviously are the two bigger buckets. So when we talk about special ed, and the reason why we talk so much about special ed is because it has a lot of rules, especially in the accounting and how you account for special ed. And there's a lot more, it's a lot stricter in how you use these funds. So when we talk about Fund 27, we talk about special ed. And so we have transit. So transit aid is going between districts. So maybe you get, if you have a service from CISA and you're, you can use money for their, for CISA services, you're transiting going between. So that's where that CISA comes from. Yorkville and Raymond have a transit relationship where we're sending money back and forth. State aid is that categorical aid that you saw before. Federal sources of special ed, mostly Medicare or Medicaid. And then there's that transfer again, which we'll talk about. And then same thing with the three big buckets for special ed: instruction, support. There are some things you do to special ed for guidance, and then obviously special ed director, and then shared services. So those are the three big buckets. Fund 21. So Fund 21 is for organizations or clubs like student council can hold money, choir fundraisers, sports concessions. They're separate from the general fund. You can hold money in there for specific purposes for students, and that's where most of that comes from. I haven't analyzed your Fund 21 yet, but that's where most districts will have some sort of Fund 21. It's not huge for K-8s, but it is useful when you don't have to mess with some of the general fund revenues and expenses. So debt service, so Raymond has Fund 38. So these are repaying debts. A lot of it is state trust fund loans. You guys have an energy efficiency loan that was started in 2014, I think. And that's on the revenue limit as an energy exemption. We have $625,000 of that left. I think it goes to 2034 when I looked at it. We have a couple of state trust fund loans with the balances there, and that's all in something called Fund 38, and that's levied for. But there's a schedule for each bond that you have to follow. So you can't just arbitrarily pick a number. And then the Community Service Fund, which Raymond doesn't have yet, but there is a possibility when you're using expenses for like baseball or recreation or childcare that anybody in the community can use. That's where you can levy for certain funds in Fund 80, and then you account for them throughout the year. So then you put all those together, and when you levy, you have basically those four things: the general fund, which we talk about special ed and regular ed, the referendum debt service fund, which you don't have, and then the non-referendum debt service fund, which is Fund 38, that is levied for, and then that Fund 80, the community service fund, those are all included in the levy. Right now you guys have the general fund and then the non-referendum debt service.
Because we don't have any referendum debt.
Right, you don't have any
We don't
referendum
have a community
bonds.
service fund yet.
Right.
And the annual meeting is when we would establish a community service fund if we decided to, as we talk through strategic plans about a rec department or community outreach or a way for us to get revenue to run our extracurriculars or Panther Pride. Those are all things that would be eligible for community service fund expenses potentially.
What fund does Panther Pride fall into?
Today,
Right now it's a general fund.
Today general fund.
Just, okay.
but it'll go into the community service fund, right?
It could be, some of it could be moved there.
And that's a tax levy, and so you would be requesting a certain amount of money on the tax bill to go towards that expense. And it would be able to run a multitude of things for the school district.
Here's just a general overview of some history for Raymond. So from 21, 22, the equalized property value, everybody's, the value of everybody's property, if you notice, it's gone up from 550 million to 735 million. It's quite a bit. The total tax levy, if you look at those numbers, you had 4 million in 2021, and then it was reduced for the last couple of years. I think it's maybe because the referendum might have dropped off. And then the mill rate, you see the mill rate numbers, and then on a $400,000 property, what the tax levy would look like. So it's gone down, obviously, because the mill rate's gone down. The calculation is a little weird, and it's a little complicated, but it's really just, if you have a $400,000 property, it's every 1,000, so it's 400. So you're just multiplying the mill rate times 400. So if you have a $100,000 property, you multiply the mill rate times 400. I'm sorry, by 100. If you have $1 million property, you know, so you just do that calculation. We would go through that a little bit more in depth. The tax levy is the sort of the big number on what revenue you're going to ask the taxpayers for. Here's a breakdown of that $3.75. I just like the way I just like the look of it so people can sort of analyze it. Out of that $3.75, you know, $3.48 is going towards the general fund, 27 cents is going towards debt. So people can sort of calculate, you know, how much they're paying off of the, you know, for students, which is the majority of the tax levy. That's also in that packet that I gave you. Here's another history part where you see the property values of Raymond, the tax levy, and then the mill rate number. So the property value's gone up. I think that's a good thing. But that means that obviously the tax burden goes up for residents. The tax levy has gone up and then it's gone down. And then the mill rate obviously has gone down. Started at $8.07 in 2014. So, and then on the last column I have how much general aid. General aid is a weird formula. There's a bunch of levels of aid, and so it hasn't changed a whole lot in the last couple of years. It has to do with your equalized value, your resident, that 3-year average, and then how much you're spending in certain areas. You guys get a good deal of, Raymond gets a good deal of general aid, which is a good thing, so we have to monitor that closely. And that's also in your packet that I gave you. Here's just a comparison of,
That state general aid calculated by the state.
so it's called something called the general aid formula, and so they calculate it based on 3 levels. So there's a primary level, a secondary, and a tertiary level. There's different calculations for each. So there's basically one big pot of money that the state says that we're going to divvy up. Obviously, like the bigger districts get more of it, like Milwaukee and Madison. And then it's just based on your previous year expenses and the rolling average of residents, and then your equalized value. So there's 3 different calculations for each. One of these, when we do the October annual meeting, we'll go through that calculation probably together. Because I literally don't get that number until October 15th. I do have my own spreadsheet that I use, but just to budget, but it's a complicated formula.
Why did it go up so much? I mean, that's like twice as much from 2020.
For which one?
Well, from 2020 to now, it's over 50% for the state general aid.
So I think, Yorkville had the same thing. When the COVID year hit in 2021, I think that pot of money increased. That's just my reaction to that. Because Yorkville had a significant increase in 2021 also. I don't have that exact answer for you
The
though.
state may have reallocated out of budget. There was some movement of how they fund schools, once in a while they'll make a change. That looks like a year that some change happened at the state level, because you're right, general aid doubled.
Yeah,
Well, even the years before that aren't very, nothing like it is now.
right.
New governor,
I mean, it could be that big pot of money just increased, or the way they calculate, they changed the calculation. It's a complicated formula.
So, between state general aid and tax levy, so that tax levies for state, look at 24-25, 2.7 million, that's what we pull in from property taxes, right?
Yes,
The 1.1 million is some state general aid.
right.
Where's the other 3 million and something that we need to, where does that come from?
Open enrollment
Okay,
is some of it,
okay,
and then special ed aid.
okay.
I'd have to look at your revenues.
Because that's really about half of our revenue.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
So here again, this is just a comparison. This is this year, the mill rate from Yorkville, Union Grove High School, the elementary school. Obviously, the high school pulls from all of the municipalities, so that's why their number is significantly bigger. And then the equalized value for each community, and then the levy, and then the referendum. So that matters, because if it's an operational referendum, then the levy tends to be higher. So for instance, Yorkville passed a referendum, operational referendum in 2023. The levy increased. Their mill rate actually dropped, but the levy did increase. And then the membership rolling average, and this is this year. So it's just interesting to look at what the other districts have. So this is just this will be filled in with, this is how they figure out what the tax levy is, and this is something that I give to the municipalities. Any questions about that before I get into something a little bit more complicated?
That was a good explanation of that.
Okay.
So when it comes to our annual meeting though this year, instead of me jibber jabbering,
Right.
I'll do some of that, and then Jeff takes over.
Oh, yeah.
Because he obviously has a different level of detail work that he can do.
Yeah.
So it'll be a combo of discussion.
So I gave you oh, sorry.
You said October 15th
Yes.
is when you get numbers?
Right.
Is there-
October 14th is our annual meeting.
So we're going to have a meeting after that.
Oh,
Yep.
Or we might want to look at moving that meeting.
The annual meeting?
Can we do
Yeah.
that?
Well, you probably can't move the annual meeting.
Can't move the annual meeting.
So the annual meeting will have, well, it just depends. So I didn't look at the actual date. It's a possibility that the 15th could be on a weekend.
well, that would,
No.
Our annual meeting is, I think, on
It is not.
Tuesday.
So October 15th is a Wednesday. They're pretty good with deadlines.
Sure.
So I don't know if it's going to come out earlier than October 15th.
So you're just going to have to forecast?
I'm going to have to forecast. You'll get a bunch of budgets from me. We'll talk about that. But on the 14th, we'll have like an original budget, and then there'll be a revised budget, and we'll have to have another meeting before November
Which we've
1st.
done in the past, because our meetings have always been in
Right.
August.
Right.
Yeah, my recommendation after this year is to have the annual meeting in August, because it doesn't matter if it's August, September, or before October 15th. So
So much for our logic of moving it.
that's okay.
There's different,
If you would have made the annual meeting after October 15th, it would have made sense. So, but October
well, we
14th,
could do it after October 15th, and then just have it the last 2 weeks of the month. It's got to be held before October 31st.
yeah. It doesn't have to be a
For the-
long
For
meeting.
the tax levy, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So if we just move it a couple of days later, then we have it all.
When does Yorkville have their annual meeting?
August.
Oh, they do have it early.
Yeah. So the packet I gave you is just an overview, again, of what I just talked about. So I know it's a lot of information in one very, short period of time. So if you ever got asked about some of these things, so it talks about the budget process, reporting, there's accounting, how the accounting works, what the revenue limit is, how enrollment plays, what's fund balance, how does that, interact with there's the tax levy, and then the mill rate, and I give you that calculation again that I just gave you before, and then some of the history, and then a description of the funds again. So all the funds we talked about, Fund 27, the debt service. There is a couple other like Fund 50 and Fund 49, but Yorkville, you guys are in a consortium with food service, which is Fund 50, so you guys don't hold a Fund 50. And then Fund 49 is if you would pass a referendum and you would, have a big project. So all that's in there. You could read it at your leisure, because I know this is so fun for everybody. So, so when we talk about budgeting, when I start on July 1st, what you'll get from me is you'll get a July budget, and they call that a preliminary budget. And then what that is just a forecast of what I know and what revenues I know of at this point. And then in July or August, you'll get another budget, which, things progress and a little bit more. And so what's weird is that the budget season starts in July, so you're expensing things to the budget without a budget. But you know what the preliminary budget is, so you're still able to expense, in the new fiscal year. You have to really make sure that a lot of the expenses, most of the expenses again are salary and benefits. So then where are those big buckets, or where can you budget some other things? So and then you'll probably get another budget from me on the 14th, and then we'll do a revised budget on between the 15th and the 31st. So you'll get a number of budgets from me, and it'll have a number of, there'll be enrollment and some history, and then the budget will be broken down, and so you can see sort of exactly, what we're expensing. The budgets I like to give are a little bit more robust, just so you have an idea of, what you're spending your money on and where the money's come from.
We will be adjusting our reports starting in July. So Pete has sort of rinsed forward what we've had in the past, just because it's what we had. We added a few things to it, but then Jeff's has an even more detailed. So what'll happen is in July, and you're involved in the conversation, but really you would discuss it with him at the finance meeting. And then when it comes to the meeting itself, he does the talking, and you're aware of it, but it's a lot more of a discussion from us explaining what's happened than what we currently do, which is just you reading the numbers, which is fine, but that's just a very different level that we're going to get to.
So here's just an example of, there's going to be three things on the reports. This is an explanation of what you kind of have now, but differently, where you see the cash disbursements. So you'll have payroll, and you'll have checks, and you'll have wires. We'll also do something called ACHs, which we're going to cut less checks and send things through wires. So we're going to start that, because postage is really expensive, and it just saves a little bit more money, and it's easier to send ACHs instead of worrying about if someone's going to cash their check or not. So this is one part of the report, and then you'll get something called a reconciliation. So you'll have the starting balances for general fund. You'll have it for all funds, but this is just for general fund. You'll have checking and a money market. They'll have the ending cash, the beginning cash, just because it has to reconcile, has to be the same. You'll see the cash receipts. You'll have the total receipts, and then you'll have the disbursements and the payroll, the ending balances on each one of the statements for checking a money market, balancing, and then reconciling to make sure that there's no differences. So that's going to happen every month for the board meeting for the previous month. So and then there's be another one called the monthly financial report, which is all the accounting that you'll get, and that one is long, but we'll go through it a little bit during the meeting. So that's just one example of sort of a new report we'll start in July.
Really, for 3 months, we kind of run in the, well, I running blind because you don't really have a budget put together.
No, I have
I mean,
budget.
no,
yeah.
no,
You
it's
don't have
just
the
the way it is.
exact, so there's two things you don't know. So there's the equalization, the equalized value of all of the municipalities.
Yeah.
So right now, we're predicting 2%. It's been like 12 to 14%. But if that happens, that's just a good thing.
Yeah.
So we sort of budget for, you know, we don't over, you know,
Yep.
we're not going to over budget and over, you know, promise something that I don't think is going to happen. So then when that happens, that's the biggest thing. And then there's some other things on the revenue limit worksheet that, but the equalization aid, that's the other one. So that formula, you don't know until October 15th.
That's kind of like the numbers we were getting last year from, what's her name? From Baird.
Yeah, Baird does a really good job at
Pretty
forecasting.
much the forecast is
They're-
the same thing, plug and play as we go, we'll find out numbers.
Yeah, they're pretty accurate.
Some folks have a hard time understanding, why is this budget changing all the time?
Yeah.
And I know it's a living document,
Right.
even if you know exactly what you're doing.
Well,
But if
and
you're
I-
running 3 months blind with, you know, just kind of,
Well, and keep in mind,
It is what
this is
it
all
is.
functioning outside of a biennial budget at the state level that may or may not come out on time.
right.
So that's another factor that plays into this, because we operate off the current biennial budget numbers. Those can impact also. So we try to forecast, we definitely don't anticipate additional revenues until it's signed, sealed, and delivered, because you can't build off what-ifs. And so we build off of what we currently have, but it is more than likely subject to change.
Do we have a crystal ball on what might be happening there?
No.
Nothing yet?
Yeah. So, just so you're aware, and this'll go, I won't go too far in depth. So when I'm looking at expenses and budget, so I call this a cohesion development document. What I have is I track this. So I'm tracking so in this column I have, this is what this year's budget is. This is as of a certain date. So let's just talk about, you know, salaries. So this is all the accounts that we work with. Okay, there's a lot of accounts, probably about 480 accounts. We just take salaries. We look at what the budget is for this certain account. We look at what the actuals in the accounting is, how much we spent so far, what the balance is, and then I project it out after every payroll, what I think that we're going to spend. So I am literally analyzing every account, and I do this for Yorkville also. And if there's anything that I see that looks like there's a problem, I'll usually put it in red or yellow. So for instance, we might have to do some journal entries for an entry that's incorrect. So I'm literally tracking every account after every payroll and making sure that when I project it, that we're going to be as close as possible to knowing how much cash or how much fund balance we're going to end up with at the end of the year. And obviously, the end of the year is June 30th. So that's one thing that I do, that I monitor. I mean, I like to be able to sleep at night. So this is one thing. I mean, it might be, you know, for me, it works just because for every account, I need to know what's in each one of these accounts. So I'm monitoring that. So for Raymond, I'm monitoring that right now. And this is for 24-25. And then I sort of I have another budget document that does something similar, where I'm looking at the accounts, and I'm looking at the activities from previous years. I'm looking at our budget. I'm looking at this year's activity. This is as of June 2nd. I'm looking at some of these variances and where I'm budgeting for. So if you notice, there's a lot of blanks, and there's the accounting when you're budgeting is trying to be as consistent as possible. So I'm not sure if Raymond was as consistent as they could be, because there's just, you know, there's not 4 numbers in each one of those columns. So my goal is to making sure that when I give you your first budget in July, that the combination of what we're spending money on and what we're going to spend money on is in the correct account. So when I'm doing this, and when I do this budget document, I also look at sort of departments. So I talked to the curriculum director, which I probably won't get to do this year, but I'll talk to all of these departments. I'll talk to music, I'll talk to the custodians, I'll talk to, well, not usually the school board, but I'll talk to as many people as I can, and, you know, what are you going to spend your money on? So there's all these buckets that we budget for, and they just say, it just has to be accurate. Right now, we will try to do I will try to be as accurate as possible. You know, the good thing about it is, again, salaries and benefits is 65% of your budget.
Devil's in the details.
So I'm very confident that I'll be able to get a really good budget, at least for expenses. Revenues are easier just because they're in bigger buckets, but then they come later. So we'll have when you see the budgets, the expenses won't change a whole lot. Some of the revenues might change, but for the most part, a lot of these budgets will be similar. So those two documents that I use help me sleep at night, just to make sure that I'm looking at every account and making sure that if we're going to spend money in a certain account, that we make sure that we have the funds there. And when I expense things for the next year, you use the account as much as you can. Sometimes you spend money on that's not in one of the accounts, but you know, it's unavoidable, but you just want the accounting to be as accurate as possible. Sure. And then the last thing I use is the Baird model, which you might have seen before. This is more helpful in trying to predict revenues. So there's a couple spreadsheets that DPI sends out. Again, they don't finalize until October, but Baird has done a really good job with, you know, figuring out or projecting what your revenues will be. I mean, obviously you have to monitor all of your revenues, but they have this thing called a model that sort of puts it all in one place. I will never give you the model itself. I just use it in the background. I just use those other budget documents, and then I give you something that you can understand. So you don't need to know every single accounting, you know, thing that happens. I won't get that to you. You'll get something that's simple to understand in sort of some of those bigger buckets. So that's just it's just another tool that we use when we budget. So those are the bigger things that I wanted to tell you. I tried to go fast, and I know it's complicated. When I start in January, again, you'll just July. You'll get your budget. You can ask as many questions as possible. I'll go through it just to make sure everybody understands, you know, what we're doing, what we're going to try to spend our money on. But I will give you the Skyward version, but I'll also give you something that's easier to understand. Because when you just export the Skyward version, it's not layman. It's just not easy to. It's not user friendly, right? So sorry. Yeah. So that's why in this report, I don't just give you the Skyward version. I give you something I'll give you both, just in case someone has a question about it. So
The goal is, by the time the annual meeting hits, there is absolutely no surprise to you as a board member. You know our numbers, you know what we're heading into, you know the deficit we have or the surplus we have, you know the fund balance. It's not the first time you're seeing it at that annual meeting. Right. And it's hard because, as you know, all these numbers come in almost real time. So to anticipate is huge. That's how Baird makes their living, and they do a great job of it. But then the practitioners in districts have to kind of get it all orchestrated so it makes sense for the locals. And so that's where I think Jeff's going to really bring us to a new level. So we are working daily with Jeff, and it's been wonderful to have a solution, you know, in the near future here. And Pete's wonderful too. Pete's been doing a great job of helping, you know, behind the scenes to try to get things again in the right buckets. So it's all part of the big puzzle, and I wanted to give you just an introduction into the mindset that we're shifting to. I think you can already see it's different than
the last year, since I've been on the board, it's like a world of change.
And it needs to be. We need to be accountable, and we have to be accountable to our public. We have to be accountable to our budget. And we all agree, it's like it's gonna sink us otherwise.
No, this is good stuff,
Yeah.
really
We're
good
already
stuff.
jumping ahead of where we were last year, coming in blind and.
So,
numbers.
can I have the cord? So I can show a little bit of my strategic plan. So, any other comments on the board, on the budget side?
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff.
Have fun with all the numbers.
So are you a spreadsheet wizard? So
Yes.
you're able to
I-
formulate?
If I could just do spreadsheets all day and not work, do HR, then I would be really happy.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely.
Takes a special
I'm not a
kind,
wizard at spreadsheets, but I know
special kind of person.
you can really do some special stuff. in it.
So our last 10 minutes here before we get Keith out to his son's baseball game is really just an update to you as to what's going on with our strategic plan. So this is a letter that I've shared with Audrey. Audrey typically drafts our board communication, the board newsletter. This is something that,
I've done for a couple months.
yep, and this is something that I'd like to share just as a starter for that, and I think we can roll in, what you currently want into the same communication. This is just celebrating our year, despite, challenges, we've done some great things. It just outlines a number of those things that are on my mind as I sat at my desk last week and just try to be reflective. This is not an exhaustive list, I'm sure there's some things I missed, but it's a good crack at, hey, this is all the good stuff that's going on at Raymond, or a good number of the good things that are going on here. And of course, it mentions we failed to referendum, but at the same time, there's a lot of hard work that goes into it. These are the people who are not returning due to cuts or have different or reduced roles, kind of putting it all out there as a, hey, thank you to those people who are, so this will go to our staff, this will go to our families, just as a communication tool. I feel like the board could easily put some information in there as well, so I, want the board to partake in this, to have one clear, unified message. And then strategic planning itself, we're rolling into. This week, Wednesday, we have our first event after the survey. We had about 100 responses on the survey, which was okay. I was hoping for more like 300, but 100 is still 100. And the idea here is that we meet with the group of people who are interested. The survey did communicate about a dozen people who said, call me, and I'd like to talk more about the school with you. So Wednesday, we sent out an email tonight announcing it and mentioning the dates of the 4th and the 14th. They're two separate, different meetings, but they're going to keep us moving towards our goal of a strategic plan that has a clear, direction for us heading into the fall. So we'll get together on Wednesday. We're going to review the survey, review the vision and mission. Session 1 is Wednesday. I will post so that board members can be present and not have an issue with quorum.
What time is that at?
5:30 until 7. Hope is 90 minutes of powerful discussion. The purpose of that meeting, though, is to really review the survey data in small groups. I'll be providing an analysis to people, and then I want you to just sit in groups and discuss and try to digest it. We'll have some prompts and discussions, and then we'll come out with some areas of focus for future meetings. And that's Wednesday. So the 14th then, we'll start to take all the conversations and analysis from the discussions we had on the 4th, and we're going to roll it into some activities on the 14th, which is a Saturday morning from 9 to noon, and we want to start to really get into, okay, what are the things that are coming out of these discussions? What are the buckets, those 4 buckets or 5 buckets or 3 buckets that we want to focus on? And that's really going to be established in that June 14th meeting, defining those buckets. For example, finance is probably one of our buckets, or resource allocation. We can call it whatever we want, but what falls in that resource umbrella, if you will. So then we want to define that bucket, who's important to be a part of that bucket. If it's resources, you betcha that JG should be in the picture, as well as Ed, as well as others on the finance committee. I think you're on the finance committee, Keith, as well. So who are the members we want to have present? And then how do we move that group forward throughout the year? The goal is that I have a strategic plan in place by October 14th for our annual meeting that we can share with our public to say, here's our plan for the next 3 years. here are the things we're gonna spend our time focusing on over the next 3 years. And there'll be 4 major categories, if I'm a betting man. It could be 3, it could be 5, but you have, figure 4 for the sake of balance. And we go through a process of having goals and metrics attached to those. It's not too big. The document usually exists on one piece of paper. Usually, it's cleanly presented, and you have the chance to take a look at it. And then each of these focus areas is then provided with who's on the committees, what are the goals for the bucket, and then what are those action steps for the buckets, and we start to prioritize this whole process. So this is an example of what could be created for each of these topic areas, the 4 buckets. So we are going through very slow. June 4th is really just what the survey tell us. And you're in the room now, so it's a qualitative discussion. Just because it wasn't written in the survey doesn't mean you can't bring it up. So we're hoping that our public will come out to that event. I've got some early indications that we'll have a decent crowd. I'm hoping for 20, 30 people that want to stay engaged. Again, bring a friend, and come yourself. And then the 14th, we'll continue that conversation, though. It's not going to be repeating what we did. We will capture the progress in some sort of update that'll go out in between meetings, because we want our public to know, we are moving this thing forward, but we are also still, sharing what we're doing. There's no secret formula to this whole thing. And then June 14th, we'll have another session, and then we'll establish our August session, probably early August, to get back together and continue on this work. And in between, I have the fun job of figuring out a way to navigate all this. So this is an example from Swallow School District, which I worked with last year. They came up with these statements that are, we will, so that. So we will restore the long-term financial stability of the district so that we can, all those things, right? That's just an example of what it will look like when it's all done, so that there's a roadmap. This gets put front and center on our website. This is really helping show we have a strategic thought process to how we do things. So this is really the end goal here. This would be something we present to our public in fall. And then as a result of this, then too, we are going to be, every year we kind of retool and we talk about committee work and professional development and how we spend our time. Our staff will be engaged on these groups. So there will be teachers working on our strategic plan as part of our professional development and ongoing team meetings next year. It's all got to be connected from the classroom ground up. And the board will get an annual report that just says, hey, here's how we're doing with all this, year 1. Here's how we're doing year 2. You start to look at year 3, and you start to actually rewrite the strategic plan for the next years. Because the goal is, if we have to go to referendum, or who knows what we decide to do with resources, we've got to have these tools in place to be able to propel that work forward. So would be a conversation about facilities in there. There'd be a conversation about budget, obviously. Those are the big ones. And there'll be some staffing and other things. Curriculum will be a part of it as well. We are a school after all. So I just wanted to make you aware of it a little bit as to what's happening Wednesday and encourage you to engage in this and bring people along the way. Not everybody's going to make it to every session. That's fine. You can join us next time. So the goal is, I could use your help for the events, bringing snacks, water. I mean, you do a great job here. But just, making it a positive experience. We have a little bit of, hospitality we can put on, but we're not going to be putting on big spreads. But I think, having a few things to munch on while people are working and talking and building community is really what it's about too. Anyone who does strategic planning work tells you the group has to have trust. That group has to establish that as a group we may disagree, but the goal of this all is to moving forward with Raymond. We're not going to get into large arguments, and this is not the venue for that. It's really planning and purpose through this whole process, if that makes sense. So there's a lot of talk of norms and rules, ground rules, those kinds of things, because there will be people who disagree, and that's fine. At the end of the day, though, we got to come out of that meeting with some momentum. So what questions do you have about our process? This sort of outlines it all at a glance in a text-heavy format. You're welcome.
So, Mike, where does our mission statement and our vision statement
So the mission and vision will be along the way. So in between sessions, I sent out a survey to you as board members as well as to our staff to ask about what do you believe for our vision and mission, vision and mission. And I haven't had food all day, so forgive me. This is what Clear Liquids does to you.
Is that what that does?
All day, yeah, right. I'm hangry. And so we will have discussion about the vision and mission. We also will gather input on our current mission, and we don't have a vision. So currently there is not a set of words that we call our vision. So we want to make sure we have that. That'll be folded into this work. So we'll share drafts of it along the way. That's part of the update. You know, there's a group that took a look at our current mission and vision. Here are the words we think stick out. Here are the words that need replacing. Here are some words we're thinking. And that'll all come from, starting with the survey I just sent to you today.
Okay.
And the staff will be putting it on that. We don't really go to the public for what do they think our mission should be because they're not doing the work. You don't usually have a mission statement written by everyone. You can bounce it off those people and say, does this make sense to you as a community member? But if you're not the one that's engaging and employed to do that work, it's really hard to get a clear direction on that.
Okay, good.
Okay?
Do we really know we have to go for a referendum without dealing with the budget first?
What's that?
Do we have to have a referendum? I mean,
Next year?
yes,
No.
because once we go through the whole budget process, we would know a lot more, right?
Yes. And so first of all, in the event we went to
So we're
referendum,
gonna talk about referendum in this.
no.
All right.
We're going to talk about our needs. We're going to say, gosh, we really need boiler, blah, 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 all those things. Get that list together. We probably are going to have to do a facilities study of some kind, right? Those would all happen before we went to referendum. You could decide in this group, though, that year one, so not next year, but maybe the following fall, we're choosing to go to referendum at that time. Because it's all pointing in that direction where we've got some failing systems and some needs. So this does not result in us just jamming a referendum down people's throats again. We have to build collective interest in this thing and make our case. And that could take all next year. We might not go to referendum in spring, that's fine. We have to make our bed and lay it anyway. We're here. So we're starting next year with the staffing plan we have in place and the budget we have in place. And we're going to do a lot next year to clarify and clean up some of those pieces. So you should feel really confident in saying, this is why we're going to referendum, X, Y, and Z. And then it's easier to sell that. And then it may result, though, in us spending some money on a facilities study or polishing off the facilities study we did 3 years ago when we failed a referendum in '22. Those are all pieces that committee can decide, we got to look at this further. It's not inevitable. But I do think if you're looking at our facilities, it is pretty clear that we've got to do something to get revenue in the millions to get this thing up to speed on our systems. But when and how, that's all for discussion. Does that make sense?
We're not a crumbling building yet, so.
Right. All right. So that really was what I wanted to share with you tonight between Jeff and this, just keeping your palate cleansed a little bit. I'm using all the food analogies I can right now. But we want you to continue to ask questions. We've got a board meeting in a couple of weeks. That board meeting is coming up on June 16th, not the 17th, 16th. And Audrey will be absent, but that's okay because Mike's got the gavel. At that time, though, we will go through our normal process and agenda. We've got nothing in particular too busy in June. June and July tend to be a little bit lighter. July, we'll have a forecast of our standards. We'll look at the academic standards for the year, as well as we'll have a budget forecast to start talking about. So, any other questions before we part ways here?
Our next workshop is,
Next workshop will be July 7th,
okay,
after the 4th.
of July.
Yep,
Okay.
July 7th after the 4th of July weekend. And on that agenda for that, we were talking about maybe having Data Wrangler come and do some talking with us about like how the system's working. They would do like a little, Zoom call with us, and then we'll have some other discussion that night.
That'd be good.
Okay. Anything else? Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion adjourned.
Second.
A motion motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned 6:34.
I usually just keep all of my receipts out here
You?
and all my
Thank you for
invoices.
food.
Yeah, thank you.
But I'm a nice guy, and I do all
We'll
the
talk soon.
month by month, what the total expenses
Thank you.
were.
Did you all right?
Jeff, thank you for the
Did you all right?
You're
I shot at 6:34, I mean, there you go.
Did
Up on a
amazing.
baseball and track.
Oh, yeah. So I went,
Did
cause
you play
I do
ranger
it
in the
monthly,
field?
what my expenses were, what my revenue,
Yeah.
what was incoming, it's all totaled out. It's all my,
So all three of them are in
Now, I
baseball?